It's called The Pressing Stones, the healing journey of a Nazi's daughter. So my father was quite an extraordinary human being. He was profoundly spiritual, at first in Christianity and then Catholicism. And then he was an avid reader of philosophy, of Indian philosophies. So his spirituality was very eclectic. He also had a huge heart. Most people who met my father loved him. I certainly loved him. He was profoundly compassionate and kind and sensitive. And you know, then he got seduced like thousands, millions of others into this idealism. So what happened during the war, my mother was already in Holland with my brother. I wasn't born yet. And then my father was sent into Holland to become part of the occupation. And he became the leader of the commander of a workers' camp. So Dutch young men were rounded up and put into these camps to use them for the war machine. So my father, being naturally an empathic and kind person, he loved them. He believed in the ideal of the great Germany, and they were going to make the world a better place. When I was born in Holland, the young men in his camp carried my father on his shoulder through the camp to celebrate the birth of his daughter, which is just such a proof of what kind of a person he was. Anyway, that has always been really striking to me, a remarkable testimony to who he was as a human being. At one point, the family had to flee Holland because the Netherlands were coming into uproar. The Dutch were in uproar against the collaborators. There were many collaborators. There were many people, many Dutch people, believed in the ideal that German National Socialism brought. And of course, you know, since my father was Dutch, he was not only the enemy, he was also a traitor. And the family, that was all in the same boat, you know. So we had to flee the country overnight, the whole family. I had a little baby sister that was just 3 months old. And then towards the very end of the war, my father was actually sent back into Holland with a small group so in the meantime he had become a member of the SS. It's a long story, it's in the book, you gotta read it. I can't tell everything today. So now he's with the SS and they send a troop together with him back into Holland while the war is already being lost. So my father with our little family go back into Holland while the Germans are straggling back over the border, leaving Holland. It was insane. It was truly insane, but those were orders. So those last few weeks in Holland, he brought us somewhere in the north of Holland, my mother and the children. And my father and his troop confiscated some estate on a lake and then took people prisoner that they suspected to be resistance fighters. So now they have prisoners. In the meantime, when we read the papers, we know what happens when in war prisoners are taken. They get tortured. That's what happens. And this is what happened. He tortured people. And when they were eventually rounded up and taken prisoner at the end of the war, you know, they went to an international court in The Hague and he was sentenced to death for war crimes. He had committed war crimes. Torture is a war crime. It's an insane situation and it needs to stop. Humanity, this is why I'm publishing my book. Humanity, first of all, needs to realize the effects on generations of victims and perpetrators during and after war. The wounding that happens, the deep psychic wounds that are inflicted on millions of people. Even today, we have a war in Ukraine. It's got to stop. Humanity has to wake up that we are all here together. We are one people. My father was sentenced to death. He was incarcerated in Scheveningen in Holland. And he was in prison for 10 years. The court case lasted for 3 years. Sometime during that time of his imprisonment, there were members in my family who were kind of upscale families. We had a psychiatrist in the family and a bishop, and that they worked behind the scene to get a re-evaluation by a psychiatrist of my father's competence to commit all those crimes. And it was determined that he did not have the capacity to be responsible for his actions. He actually thought that the Dutch may already have killed his wife and his children. So he was insane. So he actually then was, what do you call it? Released on parole, and with the stipulation that he would actually spend a year in a psychiatric institute. He would be free to come and go, but he needed to be for a year under psychiatric supervision and therapy, and then find his way back into life in the world, you know, which he had been not in for 10 years. He didn't dare to cross the street when he came out of jail, out of prison. We left Holland when I was 2, and that's really when all my safety and my natural connection with my mother and my father's presence had all kind of ended. And then I was put into boarding schools at some point when I was 5. So I was in Catholic boarding school from kindergarten through elementary. So there's a whole thing with the boarding schools and the nuns. It was not fun. I mean, there again, I was just told to be quiet and to do as I'm told. I had no voice. There was no kindness. It was very harsh. And so that was my childhood. And then my father comes home. And he loves me. And I love him. I've always known I loved him and that he loved me. That was like in my bones, you know, because I was his child. Now my father was an unusual figure. He had 2 favorite topics, that was spirituality and sexuality. And he wanted to make sure that I would grow up into an open-minded, all-understanding, compassionate woman. At some point I actually said he trained me to be a mother whore. I never became a whore, but the formation was in me. His motivation was that if I were to marry, I would marry, right? That's what expected. That my husband wouldn't have to go to prostitutes to get his needs met. So anyway, that was his kind of crazy thinking, actually. And so it was overwhelming to me. I did grow up into an open-minded woman. I'm grateful for that. And but I still had no voice. There was never once a conversation that I had agency for myself, that I could say no. It took me into my 40s before I learned to say no. I always said yes, especially to men. That was the training. There were some good things in that, and there were some difficult situations in that, you know. I got raped a few times as a teenager, so that wasn't any fun. So that all goes into the basket of my needs for healing. But I soaked him up because he paid attention to me. He was the only adult who was actually talking with me about significant things. You know, my mother was sweet and nice, and we talked about just daily stuff, you know, not anything particularly meaningful. And so I turned to my father, because that's where I got a lot of juice, got a lot of attention. He thought I was the prettiest girl that lived. There is my dad. So it was a strange situation. What he did, actually, out of this place of childhood where I was nothing, I didn't really even exist. He comes home and he picks me up and he puts me on a high horse, like I am the cat's meow. And when you are on a high horse, you're still not connected with other humans because you're looking down. So that actually added to my sense of being different, of being isolated, of not belonging. I belonged with him and with God, but I belonged with him as a human. And to my mother and my brother. I had an older brother who I dearly loved, but we didn't live together. We never lived together after this whole war experience. So then I grow up. I already mentioned several rapes. So I spent, after high school, I spent a half a year in Paris. I loved Paris until I was raped there too. And then I fled Paris. Let's see, then what happens? I get married. As a young girl, it's so weird. The stories that I would hear that would be published in women's magazines, they're all like, there's all these difficulties, and then you find the right one, and finally you get together, and now you get married, and now you're happy forever after, right? You find the man of your life, and you're going to be happy forever after. It's fairy tales too, you know, there's all this drama, and then there's a resolution, and now we're happy. Well, little did I know, you get married and then it really starts. So I was looking for a husband. That was my main goal when I grew up. It's like I have to find the right man, and then I spend the rest of my life with him and I'll be safe. So unconsciously I was looking for safety, of course, for a very long time. So yeah, my first husband was a disaster. My husband was studying psychology. So when he and his friends from University of Amsterdam, when they did their bachelor's, they got their bachelor's, we had a party, and I'm sitting at that party and I'd look at these young women and I'm going, they just got their bachelor's in psychology, and here I am being a secretary. They're not any smarter than I am. And that's what changed my mind. So then I started studying psychology. And then after my bachelor's, we were put on I applied for clinical psychology, because that was my interest. Healing has always been my interest. And both the boyfriend that I had at the time and myself, we were put on a year waiting list. So we had a year time. We were able to do some jobs and earn money. I got my whole study loan for the next year, and he wanted to go to India. And I'm going, I'm kind of a homebody, you know. I never thought I would travel the world, never. I traveled through Europe, you know, go to Yugoslavia or France and whatever. But so anyway, it was clear there was actually nothing keeping me from going on that amazing adventure. So one day I looked inside of myself and I said, so why would you not want to go? And I realized I was scared. And I had myself a good cry and I said, you're going. So we hitchhiked from Amsterdam, the hippie trail. It's called Hitchhiking the Hippie Trail, from Amsterdam to India. My father drove us to the border with Germany, He knew how significant this would be for me. I had no idea. Basically, setting foot in India was a remarkable experience. I had the immediate, spontaneous, visceral sensation of the love of the divine. And it changed. It changed me right there already. And then we went to Pondicherry because we had heard about Auroville. So Auroville, we call it Auroville in this country, but it's not O-R-O, it's A-U-R-O. It's named after Sri Aurobindo. And Auroville, ville that means city in French, is the city of dawn. And I had read about that when I was still in Amsterdam. And it gave me hope that there was somewhere on earth maybe a place where life was good. And there was a quote from Sri Aurobindo in there, just a few words, and it said, "All life is yoga." And when I read it, it rang like bells in my mind. It was like so all-inclusive. I didn't know what it meant, but it was really significant inside of me. So we had decided already we were going to India, and the one place we want to go to is Auroville. And so we went to Pondicherry. So Auroville is a new township that was designed and started by the mother. The mother was Sri Aurobindo's spiritual companion. And she wanted somewhere up on earth, a place where men and women could live without the bondage to possessions and all this egoic stuff, you know, to live for a greater harmony. And we came to Pondicherry, and I had a chance to see the mother in person. So it's always difficult to even begin to describe who she was. I'd made a friend in Pondicherry, an American man named Ron, and he said, you can ask to see her in person, just write her a letter. And I did. And we were granted to see her on, that was February 27, 1972, which I consider my spiritual birthday. Because, so another thing, I want to tell this story because it's such an amazing story. So Ron had also told me people usually bring mother flowers. Well, I was very much in a no-nonsense space inside of myself. Like, I don't know her, why should I bring her flowers? You know, it's like, forget it. If I like her and I see her again, I want to bring her flowers, I bring her flowers. That was kind of how I was put together at the time. So on Sunday morning, the 27th of February, my boyfriend and I are leaving the guest house to go to the ashram to go see Mother. And the manager of the guest house happens to come outside, and he sees us, and we're nicely dressed. He says, "Oh, where are you going?" And we said, "We're going to see Mother." He said, "Wait, wait." And he ran over to the wall, which was overgrown with hibiscus, and he picked us each a magnificent hibiscus. It was a huge orange hibiscus with a crimson heart and this long stamen out of it. It was splendid. So we got the flower. We're walking to the ashram. There are hundreds of people in line because it was Sri Aurobindo's centenary actually that year. So there were many, many visitors in the ashram. And we're going up the stairs and waiting on another floor, and then waiting on the balcony. And it's noon by the time I come to her room. She was on the 3rd floor. And my hibiscus is wilting because it's hot. It's India. It's the end of February. It's hot. My poor hibiscus is looking rather sad. So I come into her room, and then Ron had also urged me, you got to look into her eyes. Remember to look into her eyes. Because if you are behind Indian people, they may just out of their tradition prostrate themselves in front of the guru, and then they miss the most important part, which is looking into her eyes. So he had imprinted on me at least 3 times, look into her eyes. So I finally come in front of her. She's old, she's 94. She's sitting in a chair, she's kind of bent. if you want to look into her eyes, you got to get down on your knees, to be level with her face. And so I do that, and I bring my hibiscus towards her. And my hibiscus goes like this. My hibiscus suddenly opens into full bloom. I'm like, I was like being on acid, It's like, that doesn't happen. And so I'm completely mesmerized by what's happening with this hibiscus. And then there's some motion like, okay, you got to give this flower. So there's some attendant next to her, and I give the flower to him. And then it's like, I got to look into her eyes. So I look into her eyes, and she was so profoundly silent that it felt to me that she was on the other side of the galaxy. There was such a vastness and silence. There was absolutely nothing happening. And so I kept looking, because I knew something was supposed to happen. I kept looking and looking. And then all of a sudden, I heard my own voice inside of my head saying, open up. I can never tell this story without weeping. So all of a sudden, we see each other. At the same time, she's coming in, I'm coming in, we're looking at each other, and we go, it's you! There's this total recognition, both ways. It's like we were the same. We were in the same space of absolutely ecstatic recognition. It's you. And we just kept looking at each other in this incredible ecstasy of recognition. And then there was some movement like, okay, the other people behind you, you got to move along. But we didn't break our gaze. So I started to get up, and Mother looks up and follows me until, there's too much distance. And then I turn around into the room, and she turns to my boyfriend behind me. And the moment I turned around and walked out of the room, the tears started to run down my face. And I wept for 3 days. I would go everywhere. We go to the dining room, and we go here and there and talk to people, and at the same time, tears would just run down my face. What I understood was, first of all, that all my veils were torn in that moment. I was recognizing myself, my soul. My soul had completely stepped forward. There was no more veil over it. So that was ecstatic. And then being with her was ecstatic. And then there was this bitter sweetness to it, this feeling that for hundreds of lifetimes I had been looking for God. It took so long to find what I had been searching for. So on the third day, or the fourth day, I wake up in the morning, and my boyfriend wakes up, and we realize I'm kind of back down to earth. And he says, so, you ready to go? And I'm going, I'm not going anywhere. I just got here. There was no question in my mind. There was no decision for me to take. I was not going to leave. I had just found what I had been looking for, both in myself and with her. So that was the end of my relationship with this sweet man. And that afternoon I took him to the train. I started my life in the ashram first, and then to Oroville. A big turnaround happened when I got together with a shaman, and he did psychedelic healing work. And I was interested in participating in that work with him, to sit for people, to give them the opportunity to break through what we call the conscious mind, and get more easily access to the deeper layers of our being. And so I did a therapeutic LSD journey with him. And it was a remarkable experience because I had taken it before, but now it was in a therapeutic setting. And at one point, you know, I was in this beautiful space, and at one point I see my partner Harabra, who became later my partner. Harabra is pacing up and down, and I kind of see that happening, and then all of a sudden he says, "There is a secret." And I immediately knew what he was talking about, because I have only one big dark secret, that's my father's past. And it was like, oh no. But then, you know, I'm in that state and I'm going, okay, all right, I'll take a look, you know. And I went in, and I was suddenly, I was lying on the bed, and suddenly my right shoulder came forward, and I looked behind my shoulder, and I saw a mass grave of the Holocaust behind my back. And he was remarkable how he stayed with me. He wasn't flustered at all. And during the course of that session, I realized that as a child who loved my father, I had identified with him as a war criminal, and that I had incorporated by association the guilt for the Holocaust. That was my darkest shadow. And to see that, and to realize that I'm an infant, I'm a child, I didn't participate in it, it's not my guilt. To learn to differentiate myself from my father, who was so overwhelmingly present in my life, you know, was an extraordinary experience. And from then on, you know, it was just the beginning of the healing, but it was essential. It was a turnaround. Yeah, I call it a turning point in the book. Yeah. I do feel that I am coming to a place, bringing my book and the audio and this out into the world is a completion of my purpose in life. Is to bring the gift of my awareness about war, first of all, into the world. And then to share with people that that you can follow a path of healing that is right for you. There isn't one path. For some people, there's one path. For me, I don't know how many paths I've been on for my healing. I take whatever I can, whatever presents itself to me, whatever feels right in the moment. I've been with shamans, I've been with body workers, I've had acupuncture, etc. And I use my relationships as a tool for healing, because my stuff, I don't know about you, but my stuff gets triggered in relationships. My abandonment, my feeling less than, my not feeling attended to, all those old feelings from my childhood, they get triggered in relationships. And every time it gives me an opportunity to seek more healing. And now I'm actually now 81, so my book ends on my 80th birthday. I feel, and I felt then, complete. So yeah, lots of emotion comes up. You have this little picture of my child self behind me. I can barely look at it without starting to weep, because I can see how vulnerable she was. And taken me close to 80 years, this whole journey, and it's all in the book, from beginning to end.